talking about publishing for the clinical researcher and talking about ways for clinicians to get their work published in high-impact journals. My name is Lauren Wold, and I'm an associate professor in the College of Medicine in the Department of Physiology at The Ohio State University and Director of Biomedical Research at The Ohio State University. I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Elsevier publication, Life Sciences. So the outline of the talk today is, why do clinicians publish? Why is it important for clinicians to publish a good manuscript in a good journal? What is a good manuscript? And we'll talk about some ways to write a good manuscript and what it means to have a good manuscript from the beginning to the end. We'll also talk a little bit about the peer review process. When the manuscript is submitted, how is it reviewed? We will also talk about some things to avoid with publishing ethics. So how can you make sure that there are no issues with your manuscript? We'll also talk about what leads to getting your manuscript accepted. So how can you get your clinical manuscript accepted into a good journal? And then once it's accepted, what happens next? So why do clinicians publish? And why do scientists in general publish? Most clinicians publish because they have new knowledge that they want to get out to the audience. They also want to share specific information that they've discovered with their colleagues. Keep in mind that a research study is meaningful only if it is clear, concise, and it can be used by others. So if it cannot be used by others, the importance is diminished. Once again, your paper or your manuscript is your passport to your community. Also, obviously, many people publish because they're working on a degree, they're working on a fellowship, they want to get funding or to get promoted. So why is it important to submit a good manuscript? Before submitting your article, make sure it's as good as you can get it. Make sure you have your colleagues look at it. Make sure that it tells a story and makes an impact in the field. Because this will make, of course, your life easier, and the chance of getting it accepted will increase. But also, it'll make the life of the editors and the reviewers much easier. The worst part as an editor is getting a manuscript that is not complete and does not contain all of the elements required for publication. So what is a good manuscript? How do we define a good manuscript? A good manuscript is a vehicle that helps the reader understand the significance very easily of the study. Both the content is important, so what the manuscript says or what the science is telling us, but also the presentation. So one can have a very important study, but if it's not presented logically and clearly, it's very difficult to understand the significance. So let's talk a little bit about how to write a good manuscript. It's very important to make preparations before starting to make your life easier as you write the manuscript. So make sure you ask yourself why you want to publish your work. Is it original? Is it an idea that makes an impact in a field, but also does it change the way we think about a certain scientific question? So have you made a contribution in your field? How does your work exist within the context of the field? So is there a new perspective that's looked at? But also know the latest results. So it's important to know what's going on in the field in order to understand how your work fits in. So there's many types of manuscripts. Many clinical researchers will submit different types of manuscripts than those who do basic science research. So full articles are really the whole story. So they're original articles that look at a new question, that investigate a new question, but then also come up with new novel ways of looking at a certain area. And these are considered predominantly the most important papers. They're often substantial contributions to the field and really change the way something is thought of. There's also manuscripts called letters or rapid communications. These are shorter studies, but they also are very, very high impact. So it might be, as a clinician, you might have discovered a new drug that works in a very novel way and it's never been used before. So a lot of times these are called rapid communications because they're rapidly published and they really change the way we think of something. And there's also review papers, which are a review of the literature in a certain field. So many clinicians will work on a review manuscript on a certain drug, so drugs for diabetes, and they'll provide a long article that really goes over the history and the significance of drugs in a certain disease state. And these are called review papers. So it's very important to choose the right journal. So many people will ask, well, how do I know where to send my manuscript? It's important to understand where your colleagues in a field are publishing. So if you work in diabetes, if you're an endocrinologist, obviously it's important to see where your colleagues send their work. It might be to endocrine or certain endocrinology journals. So you want to ask yourself, what is the audience that you want to read your work? Because anyone can have a very exciting study, but if it's not read by people in the field, what does it mean? So you want to identify the leadership, or who's going to ultimately look at your work, and what community you want your work to be seen by. So choose the right journal, use PubMed, use the different search engines available in order to look at the aims and scope of the journal, but also what types of manuscripts they accept. So once again, if you work in endocrinology, you want to make sure that the journal you're sending your work to actually publishes articles in endocrinology. Also, it's important to go through hot topics. Many journals will have what they call hot topic areas of research, and these will be on the journal web pages that you can look at and see if they're publishing work in that field. It's also good to look at what articles you're referencing in your paper. So many clinical researchers will work in a certain field and they'll cite numerous papers in certain journals. So it's important to look at those references in order to see where you might send your work. Another question is, does the journal offer open access? So open access options are options where the author pays the upright fees and then it's available for free for anyone to download. Many journals do not offer these options, but it's important to understand if the journal you're sending to does or does not. You can see here on Science Direct where it shows that certain articles will offer open access. Another thing people are very interested in is the impact factor, which really means what sort of impact does the average manuscript in a journal make? Impact meaning, are others citing that work? So in addition, the impact factor can give you a guidance of the importance of a journal, but it should not be the sole reason to send a manuscript to a certain journal. So the impact factor indicates the number of cites that recent articles receive divided by the number of recent items or the last 2 years. And you can see here the equation. So the 2010 impact factor is really the number of citations in 2010 for articles published in 2008 and 2009. So what it shows you is, does the article have longevity? Are people appreciating the significance of the article and citing it? And you can see this, every journal lists their impact factor on their webpage, and it's important as a clinical researcher to publish in high impact journals, and we consider high impact, of course, higher impact factor. So what influences the impact factor? The turnover of research in certain fields influences this impact factor, of course, because as more people work in a certain field, more people will cite that work, and the work, of course, in the leading journals in that area will be cited more. You can see from this graph that review articles are predominantly cited more often, mostly because they give a very comprehensive overview of the field. So if you're working on a new drug, if you work in cardiovascular research, or if you're a cardiologist, if you're looking at a certain drug, it's very easy to cite a recent review paper that's looked at a whole scope of those drugs used in a certain field instead of going through it yourself. So you can see here that review articles are cited more often and for a longer period of time, whereas regular articles don't get cited as frequently in the beginning, but they also can have a longer period of citation. So what is the construction of an article? You can see here on the website for Life Sciences, which is the journal that I edit, you'll see here that it lists the guide for authors, which should be really your first step when you're looking at a journal, to read the guide for authors. And the guide for authors will give you the instructions of what you need to do in order to construct your article. It'll also give you ideas on submitting your article and the types of articles that are accepted by a certain journal. So language is very important, especially if English is not your first language. So one thing to do is be very consistent with your spelling and grammar. So it's important to look through the manuscript, make sure there's no spelling errors. It's also good to have a colleague read your manuscript and to have someone who hasn't worked on it look at it and see what type of speaker may read the article and if there's any issues with grammar or spelling. It's also good to be clear and consistent with your style. So it's very difficult when there's multiple researchers working in one study. It's good to keep consistency with the writing. So it's very good at the end to go through and do a detailed editing of the manuscript to make sure that the style is consistent and logical throughout. It's also good to be very brief. You don't have to rehash every detail. However, the significant details should really be described. So one example here, be specific, where instead of saying a higher temperature was used, you would want to say that a 48-degree temperature was used. So it's good to be specific, but also be brief. So the general structure of a research article is listed here. So the title, abstract, and keywords are some of the unique features of articles where they're easily searched on the internet. So this is where you want to make sure that you're giving the definition of what the article is talking about in the title and the abstract. The main text of the article includes the introduction, the methods, results, and discussion. So this is really the meat of the article. Then it's followed by the conclusions, acknowledgments, references, and any supplementary data. Once again, make sure that your title and abstract include the key words because these are used for searching. So the writing process. Many people think that you start writing by coming up with a title and then write the abstract. But one way that we like to tell people is the only way an article is going to be significant is if the figure and data tell the story. So your data really needs to drive the manuscript. Then, of course, it's good to write the methods, results, and discussion. What did your study tell? What story was told by the data that was collected? Then to write your conclusions and your introductions, followed by your abstract and your title. So it's really backwards. But the key here is to make your data direct the story. So many things that authors don't consider but are really important is authorship. So order and authorship abuse are something that we like to talk about up front so that there's no problems afterwards. So first author is really the person who does the majority of the study. This may be the clinical fellow that did the majority of the study, that generated the data, that came up with the analysis and the results. And they really put the paper together and are sort of the leading driver of the study. The corresponding or the last author is usually the senior author or the clinician who may have directed the overall study. This is usually if a student or fellow is the first author, the senior author would be the cardiologist, let's say, who directed the study. Make sure you avoid things such as ghost authorship, which is leaving out people who did a significant amount of the work and not including them in the authorship. And also, gift authorship is very important to be careful of, not giving someone authorship if they didn't do anything on the study. So you can see here, this is a title, virus-like particles are a highly efficient vaccine platform, etc. Is this a good title? What do you expect from this article? What is it telling you? You remember the title is the opportunity to attract readers to read your study. So it's really the advertisement for the study in one sentence. So you want to make sure you keep it informative and catchy, if you will, or short. And avoid jargon. One way we could simplify this is to make sure that we simply talk about the key drivers of the study. So virus-like particles provide diversity of targets would be a catchy title that would really grab people to read the study. So keywords, as we said before, are really what words are used to search for a study. So if someone is looking for a clinical study on the new use of a certain drug, they'll predominantly type in a search engine, clinical study, and that drug name. So you want to make sure that when you're coming up with your keywords, those words are in the keyword search list. Make sure you don't make these words too general, but also too narrow. So avoid words such as virus or mouse, but also too narrow so that you're only typing in a certain protein as a keyword. So the most effective approach is, of course, to look at other articles in the field and to see what keywords were used for those articles. And make sure that you type in those keywords and see what other articles come up. So the abstract is really the advertisement of your study. It's freely available. Anyone can read this. If they have the internet, they can use search engines to go through and read the very simplified version of the study. It's a very short description. It provides a 1 to 2 sentence introduction, a couple sentences of methods and results, and then a few sentences of discussion and what this study means. So it's a very short description and provides an interpretation and conclusions. So the introduction, as you can see here, should be brief. It should really tell the story, what is the problem, and how is this study going to interpret and add new knowledge to the field. So it's a very brief overview of the science. What is the problem? Are there potential solutions? And how is your study going to impact the field? So the methods looks at how the problem was studied. It includes detailed information so that a person can really replicate the study. That's the most important part of a method, is you want to make sure that others can do the study the same way. It provides proper controls and avoids the use of adding comments and discussion. So make sure that you keep the interpretation out of the methods. And use your references and supplementary material for previously published procedures. So if you've already published on how to do something, you don't have to do that again. You can simply reference it. So the results is what was found. How is your study significant? It tells a clear and easy to understand story, and it's structured with subheadings. This highlights your main findings and really provides the new knowledge that was gained in the study. Only include the results of primary importance that are essential for discussion of your study. The figures and tables are also very important because you want to show in a picture what the data was produced. As once was said, a picture is worth 1,000 words, which is very true if your picture tells the story. So make sure that you don't duplicate what's written in the text of the results with what's in the figures. And only use color when necessary. Most journals charge extra to publish with color, and a lot of times it's not necessary. And don't include lengthy and boring tables. So tables should tell a succinct and definitive story. So the discussion is, what do the results mean? This is a time where you can sell your data, if you will. You can tell the reader why this study is so important, okay? So check for the following, such as, have you provided interpretation of the results? Are the results consistent and presented in a logical manner? And are there limitations that have been discussed? Make sure that you don't make statements that go beyond the clear interpretation. So it's very difficult for one to say that this drug has now cured diabetes, for example. But you can say that it has been shown to be beneficial in this study for the prevention of diabetes. And don't ignore work that is in disagreement with what your work has shown. It's important to understand the limitations of certain studies and how that fits into the whole general knowledge of the area. So the conclusions is a succinct, short description of how your knowledge has advanced the field. So this provides a clear scientific justification for your work. What does it mean? What new knowledge has been obtained? Don't repeat what was said in the abstract. And the references are really your opportunity to cite the work of previous researchers. Make sure that you avoid self-citations. So it's important to not oversight yourself, if you will, and also to avoid excessive citations from certain regions. For an original article, between 30 and 40 references is usually the most appropriate number of references. So the cover letter is the letter that you send to the editor, and this is where you can tell them how wonderful your work is, and it's really your chance to speak directly to the editor. Why did you submit the article to this journal? Why do you think the journal is a good place for the work to be published? And it's also your opportunity to suggest certain people who would be good reviewers. Obviously, editors aren't obligated to use these people, but it's good to give the editor an idea of some people that would be a good reviewer. Make sure you don't list your collaborators or your friends, and also make sure to list people outside of your country of origin. So the peer review process is something that a lot of people don't understand, but it's something that is a good thing to know before you send in your manuscript. The peer review process initially starts with a technical screening where we make sure that all of the sections of the article are included. It's then sent to the editor-in-chief, who then sends it out to a certain editor to handle the manuscript. If the editor feels that a manuscript is a good fit for the journal, it'll usually be sent to between 1 and 3 reviewers for them to provide the peer review. It'll then come back, and the editor will make a decision based on accept, revision, or reject. It'll then go back to the author, and they'll be given the opportunity to potentially revise the manuscript. So this is a very simplified overview